Are rows and columns keeping you from experiencing the full potential of your garden? Your available time and the size of your garden are the limiting factors of your gardening efforts. Nature avoids rows and columns to promote diversity. A natural forest is opportunistic. Nature thrives by including all life. Allowing life to thrive and live might be the best way to keep your garden thriving.
The benefits for you as a gardener are all based on time saving. You should be able to save or cut half your time you spend in the garden and having a 50% better looking garden. So it's a double win for you if you let your garden do a lot of its own lifting and you remove yourself. Your garden will reward you with a beautiful garden, and you will have time to conquer new areas in your garden. So let's say it's early April and you're in a cold climate and your year starts and you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to have a great growing season this year. I'm going to grow lots of food. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And you plant all your vegetables. You get all your rows and columns done. You get everything set up. But what you didn't do is you didn't set your objectives for that year. Growing food might be one of the objectives, but your garden might have bigger objectives that need to be addressed. I'll give you an example. Here we have really thin soil. So my objective is to compost, to create as much organic matter as I possibly can to increase the depth of my soil. So that is an objective, and that objective takes a certain amount of time. It takes a certain amount of energy. It takes a certain amount of dedication. It takes intellect. You have to figure out where this organic material is going to come from. So with this time equation, you say to yourself, okay, I want to grow food. I want to condition my soil. I want to improve my soil. I want to have my entire piece of land covered with organic matter, with green matter. And I want to do this with 8 hours a week. So you have to be very realistic of what you can actually achieve in 8 hours. If you think about it, you have a bag of carrot seeds. You put those in the ground, and those carrots start to increase in size. They start to grow. They create organic matter. They do all these things for you. Now you multiply that by 100 different types of seeds. Then you multiply that by the perennials that you've divided. Then you multiply that by the fruit trees that you've bought and placed strategically into your garden. So this idea of using biodiversity as a time saver is something that is very rarely discussed. You know, we're always focused on, bumper crops and this and that. Bumper crops are absolutely irrelevant because any gardener who has a decent sized plot, they have to be able to feed their family regardless. So this idea of feeding yourself to the right level, and the rest of your time is spent to get your land full of fruit trees and full of plants that help with creation of topsoil or compost. So what I'm getting at is you have to really focus on what your objective is. How much time do you realistically have? You don't want to kill yourself in your garden. You want to have the garden working for you. And if you do all that with a plan, this idea of diversity and walking away from it, letting the plants do their job, is a very interesting concept that every gardener should consider, that letting your garden thrive on its own to some extent is the only way you're going to create a beautiful garden and fit it in with the time budgets that you have. Yeah, it's funny. Nature has the right attitude towards time. And nature has this built-in mechanism of creating these layers that benefit nature over time. What I mean by that, let me give you an example. So you have a field and grasses come in and cover the entire area with grass. Then what happens, birds and mammals and reptiles are hiding in the grass, and they bring tree seeds with them. Now these trees start to come through the grass, creating shelter, and you have the beginning of a forest. And this process is built into nature. And as a gardener, it's very easy for us to just say, okay, nature knows what to do. I'm going to help it. I'm going to nudge it. I'm going to give it great soil to start. I'm going to give nature the seeds it wants to germinate. And I'm going to give it a push. And then I'm going to remove myself as a gardener. I'm going to dedicate certain portions of my garden to be time sensitive. And what I mean by time sensitive is that I'm not going to spend any of my time on it. I'm going to allow the process of nature to take care of that part of my garden. And if I have that space checked off, I don't have to deal with that space anymore. I can move from that space to the next space. So by doing that, I can tackle a bigger garden. And I'm convinced that once you have your garden working, once you have your garden soils covered with life, once everything is self-maintaining, the rest of it is very easy. The rest of pushing forward to having your garden fill in, for your garden to flourish, for your garden to be healthy, that is not very hard. It's just you have to change your attitude towards letting nature work, letting nature battle in the corners for you. And if you do that, it's not hard. You will have the most beautiful garden you can ever imagine, because life always wants to stay alive, and life wants to move forward. And plants and flowers and grasses, they want to go through the process of creating seeds and flowering, and they want to do their thing. They want to get to the other side where they can have more offspring and more coverage of the area that they're occupying. And it's interesting when you have these interwoven gardens, and there is this respect between the plants. And that respect between the plants is very, very beneficial for gardeners, because those plants will help each other get through the process of populating an entire area. And the more you let your garden be successful by maintaining itself, by allowing it to grow, by watering it once in a while, by giving it some compost once in a while, once you start a garden, everything will fall into place, everything will work for you. Keep your garden covered, keep your garden moving, keep your plant diversity at the maximum that you can get it at. Keep everything moving forward, and gardening will be a lot easier for you, and you will spend a lot less time on certain areas that you used to completely control. Allow nature to have a lot of the control, and you will be rewarded with a beautiful garden. Yeah, I want to get into the time equation of gardening. And what I want to explain is the math behind it, how it actually works. So I've got an acre here that I need to fill up with plant material. How do I do that? Fortunately, there's lots of plant material everywhere around where I am, and it's not so hard to fill up the spaces. The problem is time. How do I find the time? I'm building this eco lodge, so how do I find the time to fill up the entire garden with life? How do I do that? The equation is very simple. I have to allow a certain portion of this garden to do its job on its own. I can't baby it. I can't maintain it in such a way that I have to spend every waking hour on it. I have to let life do a lot of its own work, its own pushing. So let's say you had a naked piece of land, a bare piece of land that is 1 acre, and you want to cover every square inch with life. And you want to not have to spend your entire life doing that, or you don't have more than 8 hours a week to do that. So the approach the only approach there really is in that case is you start to get the seeds you require. You start to get cuttings, you start to get certain plants, and you start a multiplication factor. You want to multiply what you have. You want to diversify what you can get into your garden. And what happens is you will find that it starts to fill itself in. I have right now, my estimate would be 40% of the garden is self-maintaining, and the other 60% is for food production and growing more perennials and multiplying plants and starting seeds and moving in a new direction with all those things. So time, if you consider time your worst enemy or your biggest limitation, then you might have to garden very differently. If you are trying to grow your own food, let me tell you, the growing your own food is the easiest part there is. I don't care what anyone tells me. If you have any gardening skills, you can provide a household of, let's say, 4 people with a certain parcel of land. You can provide them with food very easily for the months where you can grow food if you're in a cold climate. Now, time. How do you deal with time in a garden? This idea of rows and columns and constantly weeding and looking after your garden and making sure that everything is looked after really well and you have everything separated, the roots aren't touching each other, you know, everything is well defined, well organized, and you are in complete control of your garden. That is tough. That's tough gardening, is where everything is being controlled by you to the limit where it can't do what it likes to do, what it wants to do, what it's supposed to do. You are an absolute control freak in your garden. You are going to spend a lot of time. So back to the 1 acre of naked land, good topsoil, let's say, and you want to get that covered. So you basically get all kinds of seeds, throw them in the ground. You go very chaotic about it. You have this life taking over. You have all kinds of other life showing up. And your garden is starting to fill in like a disease. It's spreading throughout the land and filling it. And then all of a sudden you are 2 years later, and every square inch of your garden is covered with something. And you are the custodian that has stepped back. You're here, your garden is over here, and it is doing its job the way it wants to do its job. But you, as the gardener, are benefiting from all this stuff. There's food growing in this corner. There's cabbages over here. There's carrots growing in between some perennials. You have flowering plants that are going crazy. You have your fruit trees in the middle popping out, providing shade, providing strength. You have a garden that is working towards mimicking nature. It is trying its best to be completely self-sufficient on its own. And here you are as the gardener, you've lost complete control of your garden. Everything is filling in. There's stuff that is growing so fast you can't keep up with it. You keep separating it and you're moving it to another part of your garden. And when there's bountifulness and when there's diversity and when there's everything thriving really well, then all of a sudden you have this option of having this flame or this spreading going through your entire garden and ending up covering everything. And you realize very quickly that that's the only way to garden, is if you have limited time and limited resources and limited even space, garden space, then for you to let your garden take over, to flourish, is the best way for you to save time. So think about that the next time when you have the urge to control your garden. You might be better off letting your garden do its thing. And then you come back later on and you say, okay, I'm going to move the English ivy, which is taking over here. I'm going to cut a lot of it. I'm going to keep very little of it. I'm going to make sure that these fruit trees are 100% looked after. That's my priority, the fruit trees, so they establish themselves. I want everything to be looked after, but I want it to be sort of an afterthought.